Quick disclaimer, Learn from Mac is an independent educational project. We are not affiliated with, endorsed by, or sponsored by Apple, or any vendor or product covered in this course. Hey, welcome back to Learn from Mac. I'm Dennis, and today is day 02 of the F5 LTM R4600 Bootcamp. Today we build the actual network identity of this box, VLANs, self IPs, and a default route, so traffic has somewhere to go in and out of. Let's get into it. First, the goal. By the end of this lesson, you'll have tagged VLANs created, self IPs bound to the correct traffic groups, and a default route installed, the layer 2 and layer 3 foundation every virtual server you build later depends on. Here's what you need. Day 01's initial setup completed, your interface to segment mapping confirmed, which blade interfaces are external versus internal, and an IP plan ready, at least one external self IP, one internal self IP, and your default gateway address. 4 concepts before we touch TMSH. Concept 1, VLANs. A VLAN on BIG-IP is a named layer 2 broadcast domain bound to one or more interfaces, tagged or untagged, with a unique 802.1q tag. At minimum, you'll have one external VLAN for client-side traffic and one internal VLAN for server-side traffic. Concept 2, self IPs. A self IP is a layer 3 address. The BIG-IP itself owns on a VLAN, not a virtual server address, but the appliance's own address on that segment. It's used for routing, health checks, device-initiated management traffic, and SNAT origins. Concept 3, traffic groups. A traffic group floats between active and standby in an HA pair. Traffic group 1 is the default floating group. Self IPs there move with the active unit. Traffic group local only is non-floating, pinned to a specific chassis. That's what you use for per unit management addressing. Concept 4, port lockdown. This is the per self IP firewall setting controlling which protocols and ports get accepted on that address. Allow none blocks everything, allow default permits a safe baseline like SSH and HTTPS, allow all opens everything. Always use the most restrictive setting the segment actually needs. All right, 3 labs back to back. First, we create the external and internal VLANs. Then we assign floating and non-floating self IPs with the right traffic group and lockdown. Then we install the default route and verify reachability end-to-end. Let's get into it. Lab 1, create the external VLAN first, tagged on the client-facing interface. Now the internal VLAN tagged on the server-facing interface. Verify both VLANs actually exist. And save. Lab 2, create the external floating self IP first. This one moves with the active unit. Then the non-floating external self IP pinned to this unit specifically. Same pattern on the internal VLAN, floating then non-floating. Verify the traffic group assignments landed correctly. This is the part that's easy to get backwards. And save the config. Lab 3, install the default route out the external gateway. Verify it's actually in the table. Now prove it actually works. Ping the gateway, then an internal server across the other VLAN. And a full interface stats check before saving. And that's the network identity built. There are self-check questions on the lesson page worth sitting with, especially the floating versus non-floating traffic group distinction, since getting that backwards is one of the most common HA misconfigurations. Take a minute with those. Quick recap before we go. Every VLAN needs a unique 802.1q tag and at least one tagged or untagged interface. Self IPs on traffic group 1 float with the active unit. Traffic group local only stays pinned to one chassis. Port lockdown should always be the most restrictive setting the segment actually needs. Never default to allow all. And a default route out your external self IP's gateway is what actually lets traffic leave the box. Verify it with a real ping, not just a route table entry. All right, that's day 02 in the books. VLANs tagged, self IPs bound to the right traffic groups, default route installed and verified. That's a real network identity now, not just an unboxed appliance. If this was useful, hit subscribe. You won't miss a single lesson. Next up is day 03, nodes, pools, and pool members. See you there.